The voice on the phone sounded wrong. In Fort McMurray, a friend held the receiver and listened as Amber Tuccaro tried to pin down where the man driving her was taking her. In the background, a calm male voice kept answering, naming roads and nearby towns, insisting they were heading toward the city. Amber did not sound convinced. Her frustration finally cut through the engine noise. "You'd better not be taking me anywhere I don't want to go." It was meant to be a quick check-in during a short trip away from home. Instead, almost by accident, it captured the last known moments of a 20-year-old Cree mother whose killer has never been found. Before that call, Amber's life was ordinary in all the ways that mattered. She was born on January 3, 1990, a member of the Mikisew Cree First Nation from Fort Chipewyan in northern Alberta, the adopted youngest in a family with 4 older brothers. She was the loud one, the kid who teased, joked, and sang even when she could not quite hit the notes. Her mother, Vivian, later said Amber's laugh filled a room. When Amber became a mother herself, that energy narrowed to one focus. Her son Jacob, born in 2009, became the center of her decisions. By the summer of 2010, she was living in Fort McMurray with Jacob and her mother, trying to keep bills paid while raising a 14-month-old boy who followed her everywhere. By August, Amber wanted a break from the grind of routine and stress. On August 17, 2010, she boarded a WestJet flight from Fort McMurray to Edmonton with Jacob and a woman she had met at a local women's shelter. The trip was supposed to be simple: a short getaway, a change of scenery, and a chance to spend time near the city. They checked into a motel in Nisku, a small community south of Edmonton near the international airport. From that motel room, Amber called home, talked about Jacob, and gave every sign that this was just a quick trip. Nothing about that first day suggested that anything was about to go wrong. On the evening of August 18th, everything narrowed to a single decision. Amber wanted to go into Edmonton. She left Jacob in the motel room with the friend she had traveled with and walked outside to find a ride. Witnesses later reported seeing her get into a vehicle with an unknown man along the rural roads in Leduc County. To people hearing the story afterward, it sounded like the kind of choice people in that area made often, accepting a ride along a highway and expecting to be dropped off closer to town. To investigators who later tried to piece together her movements, the moment she climbed into that stranger's car became the point where the story shifted from routine to danger. Somewhere along those back roads, Amber's phone rang. The friend back in Fort McMurray heard her asking the driver where they were and where they were going, trying to orient herself. The man replied in a relaxed tone, saying they were taking a back way and mentioning places like Nisku and Beaumont. To someone unfamiliar with the area, his answers might have sounded believable. RCMP investigators later said they believed the vehicle was actually heading south into rural Leduc County, away from Edmonton, despite his words on the tape. On the recording, Amber's unease is clear as she pushes him more than once. When she tells him he had better not be taking her anywhere she does not want to go, the tension in the car sits right under the surface. Then the call ends. From that moment forward, no one who loved her ever heard her voice again. When Amber failed to come back to the motel and did not call, her family knew something was wrong. Vivian reported her missing, but later described being brushed off, told that her daughter was probably out partying and would show up on her own. At one point, Amber's missing person entry was removed from the National Police database based on the assumption that she was safe. Leads that might have mattered early were not pushed as hard as they could have been. Her family searched, phoned, and pressed authorities for answers while the official response moved slowly. Jacob was left without his mother, and no one in a position of power could explain where she had gone after she stepped into that car. Nearly 2 years later, on September 1st, 2012, that thin hope ended. Horseback riders moving through a rural field in Leduc County came across human remains roughly 35 kilometers south of Edmonton. Investigators were called to the scene. Dental records confirmed that the remains belonged to Amber Tuccaro. The file shifted from a missing person case to a homicide. The field where she was found lay in an area where the bodies of several other women had also been discovered over the years, adding to persistent fears that a predator might have been using isolated farmland around Edmonton to hide victims. Just days before the discovery of her remains was publicly confirmed, the RCMP took an unusual step. In late August 2012, they released a portion of the phone call Amber had made from the car on the night she disappeared. News outlets across Canada played the clip. Listeners heard Amber asking where she was and why they were not on a main highway, heard the man's calm voice insist they were taking a different route into the city. Investigators asked the public to focus on him, his accent, the way he pronounced town names like Nisku and Beaumont, the rhythm of his speech. "Do you recognize this voice?" became the question repeated on newscasts and posters attached to a young woman's face and the knowledge that her body had been found in a field south of the city. The response was immediate. Tips came in from people who thought the voice sounded like a neighbor, a former partner, a co-worker, a local driver. RCMP investigators followed leads, compared names, and tried to match the anonymous voice to a real man. Specialists listened to the recording, studying the speech patterns for clues about region and background. As the months passed, police acknowledged that the release of the recording had not given them the decisive break they needed. The man's identity remained unknown. What had once looked like the strongest possible clue in the case settled into something else, a haunting fragment that kept looping in the public record without answering the central question of who was behind the wheel. In 2014, Amber's family filed a formal complaint about how the RCMP had handled the investigation. They said officers failed to treat her disappearance with urgency, mishandled evidence, and did not properly follow up with witnesses. The Civilian Review and Complaints Commission for the RCMP spent years examining what had happened. In findings made public in 2019, the commission described the investigation as deficient and said the Leduc detachment had not followed policy or basic investigative standards. Among other things, it found that officers failed to seize Amber's suitcase from the motel and that her belongings were later destroyed instead of preserved as potential evidence. The report made dozens of findings and recommendations, and the RCMP issued a public apology to Amber's family for the way the case had been handled. The apology did not change the core facts. Amber had left a motel in Nisku on what she believed would be a short ride into Edmonton. She had realized something was wrong and said so out loud while a friend listened on the phone. Her remains were found in a farmer's field 2 years later, and the man whose voice was captured on that recording still had not been named. Over time, Amber's case became part of a larger national conversation about missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls in Canada, often cited as an example of how families felt they had to fight for basic attention and resources when their loved ones disappeared. Her relatives spoke at gatherings and memorials, describing the years spent waiting for a call that never came, and the hurt of learning from the commission's report just how many early steps in her case were mishandled or ignored. For Amber's family, the years since her death have been divided between grief and a steady determination to keep her story in the public eye. They have stood at vigils, talked to reporters, and repeated the same request. If you recognize the voice on the tape, come forward. They live with the knowledge that there is a recording that almost certainly captures the sound of the man responsible for her death, and yet he has not been held accountable. As Jacob grows older, they have tried to make sure he knows not only how his mother died, but how she lived, funny, stubborn, devoted to him, and determined to build something better for both of them. Today, more than a decade after the call from that car, The audio clip of Amber's final known conversation is still at the center of the investigation. The RCMP continue to ask the public to listen to it and to contact them if they recognize the man's voice. For the people who loved Amber, that sound has become a permanent echo, a reminder of a young woman who trusted the wrong stranger on an August night and never made it back to her son. Until the man in that recording is identified and held to account, the story of Amber Tuccaro's last ride out of Nisku remains an open wound. Thank you for listening to The Lantern's Tale. Subscribe for more true stories, if you dare.